Good evening or afternoon. Today is day 4th of the Inspiration Week, and we are running this Inspiration Week talks in celebration of Ada Lovelace Day and the campaign we're running across the globe. So a lot of the hackathons will be wrapping up and finishing on the 10th of October. And we do know many are eagerly waiting for the talks and speakers to inspire them whilst they are hacking and creating solutions to the problems. And today with us, we have an incredible speaker who will introduce and demystify the challenge around peace, security, peace, justice, and institutions. And we have Mandy Sangera, who is a philanthropist and an activist who has been working within the UN and various international organizations. She has been campaigning for the rights of women for many, many years. I've known Mandy for a long time now, and Mandy has been supporting our work around the world. And very recently, Mandy has been engaged with saving some women from Afghanistan as well. So really, really phenomenal work around the globe, mostly to protect and defend vulnerable women. So Mandy, it's so good to have you again, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm so excited to be involved and love setting challenges, and I love engaging with young people, because obviously I've been involved with so many of the hacks with teams and AI, and I'm so passionate about making sure that young people understand about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And number 16 is one of those goals that people don't always think about. Think about peace, justice, and strong institution. But this one's about the laws of the land internationally and nationally. And as you just said, I've recently evacuated just over 80 people. 48 of them are campaigners, journalists, and people, minority groups. And then there's a lot of young people, their children, who have come to this country in America and gone to Canada and gone to Germany and other countries around the world where people are hosting refugees for us at this moment in time. So again, when we think about Goal 16, we always think that actually we live in a country with democracy and that we are active citizens of whole society, that we are able to invest in our decision making, we are able to transform the world that we live in. And I love the fact that in these hackathons around the world that young people are going to be hacking about issues that are so important to them. And again, when we think about Goal 16, people don't always realize that one of the first things is it's around reducing all forms of violence, especially related to death everywhere. So think about that for a minute. How can we reduce death, especially of young people, and how do we tackle some of those issues? So when we think about conflict, think about Afghanistan today, the country is in war, it's been taken over, and people are, no access to money, they can't have food anymore, and actually people are starving. So, this is a real issue and a real global humanitarian crisis. Now, one of the other things that I'm really passionate about is actually ending all forms of abuse. But actually, one other thing that I'm really passionate about, and I've been involved with the American Trafficking Task Force with people like Jerome, is around ending trafficking of humans and selling humans. This is $185 billion. That was the number years ago. And I know that it's way more than that, where people are being forced into labor, into the sex industry, being forced to child labor, children being taken out of school, children being kidnapped, being exploited for their limbs and their organs. So that, again, is one of the real things about stopping the torture of children and making sure that we protect children. And again, when we think about having access to justice, we have seen in certain countries, if you belong to an ethnic minority group, or even in the UK, stop and searches affect more Afro-Caribbean young men than they do. And yet we've seen some figures that actually it could be white British people that could be carrying a Class A recreational drug, as so they call it, but yet a young person may have a bit of cannabis or weed, whatever you may call it, and will be pulled over and end up being questioned and taken into custody and whatever else. So we really need to look at those issues. And again, people don't think about reducing corruption and bribery. And how do we do that? And we have seen this all over the world. When we think about conflict, we think about arguments and look at some of the issues that affect people. It's all about corruption. And how can we tackle that? And I would be coming into that later on, because AI is actually a solution. Tech is the way that we're going to tackle crime. So, when people are moving money, laundering money and large assets, we need to look at how can we protect people? How can we stop that corruption? How can we stop the organized crime, the multi-billion-dollar business that is happening around the world? And then again, we have to ensure that we are responsive, inclusive, and taking part and representation at all decision making in local governments and in institutions. So for me, it's really important that young people are the change makers of the future. It's so important, if you're a person like me in a position of power and privilege, that you send the elevator back down and you collect the next generation, that we make sure that your voices are being heard, that when young people want to make a decision or they want to make choices about their life, that they do have those choices. And we've seen in recent months and years, people like Greta talking about climate and Malala around girls' education. And there are so many other activists and campaigners who are talking about issues that are affecting them. Just recently, again, in Afghanistan, young people campaigning to the right to education, want to go back to school. And I think that we need to look at those, and we have to strengthen national institutions and going through and working and looking at the capacity building. People don't think about that, but it's about looking at how do we combat terrorism and organized crime. And we have to make sure that we don't discriminate and make sure that we leave no one behind, Elena. And it's so, so important that when young people are thinking about challenges today, that, sometimes we think about peace and we want to bring peace to the world, but we need to look at what are the issues affecting people. And we have to think about some of the crimes that are affecting young people, even in the streets in the UK today and in America and other countries. And again, what role can young people play in social justice? How can young people really make a difference? How can their voice be heard? How can we empower them to make sure that there is representation in the courts? And how can their voice be heard? And, courts are a very scary place. People wear wigs, especially in the UK, and it doesn't look like a very friendly environment. So again, in the past, I've worked with people with disabilities who have been victims of crime and they want justice. And it's about bringing intermediaries in to support them, to make sure that they are supported, that when they are being cross-examined or when they are being challenged, that we have resources and technology, sometimes using video screens behind, so victims don't have to face the perpetrators in the room. So we have used technology for good for years. But I'd also seen that, there are things where now with the currencies and tech that people can do more things with it, where they can, take money out of a country and bitcoins and things like that. So cryptocurrency. It's about how do we manage that. One good thing that I saw some years ago was a great app that somebody created, and they, when you think about our faces, there are some things that will never change because they're very unique to us. Our fingerprints are our own, and our eyes and things, So when you think about our biometrics, those things never change because those are the things that, people can track us. So that's another good thing that happens. So, there was somebody that had been trafficked across Europe into another country, and they were missing and we couldn't find them. They were a 16-year-old young woman. And by her eyeball scanning, she turned up at a screen and she was reported missing. So it picked up. So, we've seen technology work in a really good way. So I think when we think about, the street cameras, I mean, the UK is kind of full of CCTV cameras and things like that. But again, we can see things that are happening in our communities and we can spot things, and there is good technology out there. So I'm going to come over to you and take some questions. And I think it would be great for you and I to have a dialogue as well, Elena.
I think I was muted there. Thank you so much, Mandy. for this. No, this is a really, really great challenge to offer. We've never really offered this challenge to young people before, but it's something I'm passionate about as well. And we will be hosting our demo day during United Nations International Day for Science for Peace and Development. And so I wanted to tie this in with a challenge and see what young people will come up with when it comes to what is really happening right now. And we have teenagers in Palestine at the moment in a hackathon. It's a hybrid hackathon, so partly it will be happening online and partly offline. We have some teenagers in Syria as well, in 3 cities, I believe, also run a hackathon. And it will be very interesting to see what will come out of this hackathon and how they will be tackling, what kind of problems they'll be tackling from the perspective of their circumstances. But the question I have for you is, what kind of solutions do you think young people could come up with to some of the problems that we have discussed today? What do you see them doing? Have you seen any perhaps previous examples of them tackling a challenge like this?
This is a goal that a lot of young people kind of keep away from sometimes, and they kind of find it very big. But I think when young people are wanting to access justice, people don't actually even understand that in some countries. And I'm so pleased that we have young people in Palestine and in Syria, and I know that we've had other countries. We had people from Afghanistan previously, and now their life has changed, and we've had to move the girls, and they've gone. And and young people. So I think a couple of the challenges that I think that would be really good is around looking at around young people living a life free from violence and being trafficked into forced labor, because actually people don't realize that if you live in certain countries, when you're 11 or 12, you're taken out. Your parents will take you out of school because they can't afford to keep you in school, even though there may be free school, but actually they can't afford to stay in, the cost of living, and they can't do that. And we have seen children being forced to work in awful industries, slums, in coal mines, digging for diamonds. We've seen it all over the world. So it would be really interesting to see if there was some sort of app that could maybe look at tackling maybe young people, stopping children being exploited. What could we do to educate and help them to see your rights? Because people don't realize that you have a right to an education, you have a right to make choices. And sometimes people don't know that. I think it's about looking at staying safe. There are things about what does justice look like. I saw a really clever game, actually, that somebody created. And this is a long time ago. And it was around what does justice look like? What does it mean for me? And how do I access justice? So for people with disabilities, like I said to you, maybe if there was a virtual tour of a courtroom, for instance, Elena, you're the judge and you've got your lovely white wig on and you look, lovely, but you're very scary because actually I've not seen somebody wear a wig before. Why do everyone wear black cloaks for? Why is everyone in that, perpetrators are in that room? And so, to show people what to expect, so get them ready for court. So that's one. And again, looking at issues that are affecting you, what would you want for justice to look like for you as a young person? And, there is a real need for education for young people to know about their rights. And young people have human rights as well. They're not just adults' rights. Children have rights as well. They have a right to an education. They have a right to no one to abuse them and exploit them. And I think, there's been things where we have seen institutions not be so inclusive of young people, because actually, I've seen your lovely Victoria, who's got a lot of talent and lots of skills, and young people are knocking on doors to get work experience or get internships or want to get an opportunity to go and work somewhere. And then they're given an internship, but they got to not be paid for it. They're not even going to give them their travel. So we need to look at those things as institutions and as organizations. We have a responsibility. If we want to engage with young people, then we need to make it accessible And how do we engage with young people to make sure that they are at that decision table, that they are in those conversations? So as I've gone around the world and gone to the UN many times and attended lots of youth conferences, it's always the children that can afford it. It's always the countries where your parents or your school's going to be able to pay for you. But if you live in Syria, you live in Palestine, or you live in Africa, or you live in a country where you don't have money. So what I've always done is, if I do a conference, I always say to young people, especially from those rich countries who can afford to, I'll say, I want you to sponsor a friend. I want you to bring a friend along to this conference and share your resources. If you're going to get a room because your parents are going to pay for it, why don't you bring Victoria along with you? And Victoria could share a room, and Victoria could treat that person to a meal, for instance. And again, they will share that experience. You're bonding, building relationships. And the thing is, when we look at these great conferences, we look at these great events that are happening, they're not always inclusive. They really disadvantage young people. So again, think about, how can we make things more inclusive? How can we make sure we leave no one behind? How can we make sure representation and all the gender intersectionalities that affect young people, race, age, gender, sexuality, all of those things are represented and have been addressed as well?
Thank you for that, Mandy. And do you think realistically, are young people being heard, or is this all just talk? There's COP26 happening. There are so many rallies and strikes. Young people are participating, but are their voices actually heard? Are institutions listening to what the young people have to say?
I think there's, climate justice and the climate action is really picked up momentum, because actually, we have to really do a big reset. We have actually, destroyed the planet for the next generation, and we have a moral responsibility to really think about our consumption of things, think about what we've done. Now, that's a really interesting point. It comes back to the privileged children that have the connections who will be invited. It will be the children who will be given the opportunity to be given a seat at COP26, whose school might be involved, or their parents are involved, or they know somebody, or they're linked to an organization who's taking part. And I think, when we think about we've seen through the pandemic that inequalities have come to the surface like never before. We have seen the class of 2020-21 be affected like never before. So young people around the world have been out of school. And those children that were always at disadvantage, who were always living in areas of lots of deprivation, never had access to computers, Elena, never had access to internet and Wi-Fi. So if they don't have those basic amenities and things to themselves and that access, then they're never going to get that access to be at that table, to be doing it. And even though they may be passionate about wanting to make a real difference in their own community. One thing I will also say to young people, when you're thinking about this, think locally and, sort of think globally, act locally, because sometimes, when we're thinking about the big UN and we're thinking about all those things, a lot of the issues that are affecting you are actually on your day-to-day basis. So think about it that way as well. But I do think that we have a long way to go to get every young person's voice to be heard. And again, maybe this is the time that we create an app to make sure that we leave no one behind, that we do create something where young people can have a safe space to have conversation and dialogue. Young people want to connect with other people. When you're an activist and a campaigner, you cannot do it on your own. There is no I in a team. It's a movement. So whether it's about climate, about gender equality, poverty, or abuse, or the Me Too, you can't do it on an individual. So you need to bring a tribe with you. And it's really important that we look at creating technology to keep people safe. Looking at crimes. I know in the past I saw a great one of yours where they were doing I can't remember if it was Pakistan or India. They did technology for young women to stay safe. Looking at rings and clips and things where they could ask for help, and panic alarms and different things like that. So think about staying safe in your own local community. And that how can you report things safely? If you live out remotely, how can you report a crime? So think about those different kind of things that you can also do in your challenges.
And the last question, Mandy. So some of the hackathons will be ending this weekend, and some will begin next weekend, next week as well. What would be the action points that you would like them to take after the hackathon is over? Because many think, oh, it's a competition, I have won or I didn't win, and that's it. They forget about it.
No.
And the next day, school starts, life starts. What would you like them to do after a hackathon is over?
So, I mean, I've been involved with you for many years, and one of the things that I have seen is that you've created a really safe community for people to build relationships and connections. And I've also seen where we have marketing and sponsorships and we get people to think about their ideas. We've seen apps that people have built for the national health and came up with some really good ideas. And thinking about not just a phototype of something, it's about looking at how would I get it out there realistically? Use your voice and social media for change. Join groups and things that you're interested in. So if you pick a sustainable development goal of your choice that you're interested in, go out and see who else is doing that work. So like I've led on SDG 5, and I always do a high five for gender equality. But then again, I've done a lot on SDG 10 recently around the inequalities, and we've seen how that's affecting people. And before, people probably weren't so interested, but now the pandemic, people have realized that we've all been in the same storm, but in different boats. Those inequalities of digital poverty, losing your jobs and being furloughed. Even in England, we've seen people being left behind. So I think that my takeaways would be, use this opportunity to really connect with people globally, keep the momentum going. And then also, it can't just be like a weekend of doing something and great, I've done this. And taking part is also a great thing. And it's a competition. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But you know what? Taking part is the fun part. The winning is just another thing on the end of it. Think about all these great things that you're going to be able to come up with. Think about the coding and using Python and whatever else you may be using, that you're going to develop skills. You're going to connect and learn from people like myself and Elena, and there's going to be so many other great speakers joining you throughout the week and have done. Follow those people, see if they can support you. And also think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're in the decade for action. This is the decade now. We're in the last final decade for action. What do you want for the next 10 years? What is it that you think by 2030 the world is really going to be looking like? Are we really going to be able to achieve all the UN Sustainable Development Goals? If we all did our own little bit, we're taking a step in the right direction. So that's what I would say. Become a bit of become about action. Make sure that you are passionate about the things that you do. Find things that you're interested in, and also just network, connect people, and most of all, have fun and enjoy, because I do as well. And like Elena knows, I just love coming to the hacks, and I love judging, and I love being a part of it, because I've learned so much from all the amazing young people. They have such great vision and great ideas, and and they just want you to reassure them. But I always think to them, believe in yourself, because you came up with the idea as well. So that's what would be my advice. And I just think fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mandy, for joining us today. As always, it's a pleasure to have you, and I know we can talk for hours, but we have our second speaker who has just joined us already. So I'm going to wave a goodbye to Mandy. Thank you so much, Mandy. I'll be catching up with you soon.
Yes, in Dubai.
Yes, we'll be seeing you soon in person. That will be amazing.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And everyone, we have our second speaker today, Jeremiah Edwards, who is already on the call. Jeremiah, how are you?
Oh, hello. I'm doing pretty well this morning. It's morning for me. I know we have some participants 12 hours off. It's 9 p.m. for all those people in Kazakhstan now, but welcome.
Yes, definitely. We have one happening in Hong Kong as well, and many of them will be already, winding down and falling asleep and hopefully resting. But so great to have you, Jeremiah, and everyone. Jeremiah Edwards is a senior machine learning engineer at Sage. and Sage is one of our sponsors for this campaign. So we are really, really proud to work with the second largest company in the UK. So Sage have been incredible supporting our programs. And we're really, really delighted. Jeremiah, you have been joining us in quite a few locations, and you've even supported us in the Accelerator, and you have seen our very ambitious and enthusiastic young people at work. So it's over to you. I know you have an incredible talk prepared on AI ethics and also on the impacts of technology on climate change. So I'm really looking forward to listening to that now. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. God, let me just see if I can share my screen and get a few slides up. I have to say, I mean, this is Inspiration Week, and it has actually been inspirational. That word gets thrown around a lot, but to participate in these hackathons and to see the projects that are coming out of them and to see the ideas that young people are having. I think one of the things I'd like to highlight today is actually, let me click a few more buttons here, is actually how by participating in these events, everyone here is joining a larger conversation that's happening, and adding their voices to a change that is sweeping the globe, that is happening in various industries. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's affecting the software industry, and a little bit about how we use AI and ML at Sage, where I work. But before we get into that, I want to just share a message. Today's talk can kind of be summed up in one phrase, and that is ML systems are for humans. And not only are ML systems for humans, but they are by humans, like me, like you. So here are a couple of quotes that I think touch on both aspects of this. And yeah, I think keep this in mind as we go through. I'll try to come back to it a couple of times. But if you take only one thing away from this talk, ML systems are for humans. Today, I'm going to go over a quick introduction of myself and where I work right now and the kind of work that we do. And then I want to talk a little bit about how AI has evolved and where it comes from, and highlight the work of some people that I find to be very inspirational and whose work I still use every day and that we can all learn from. Then I'm going to talk about a bit of a paradigm shift in the software industry specifically, away from traditional software development practices towards the development of machine learning models and AI. And finally, I'd like to shift the focus and end things on some of the challenges and opportunities that come from that transformation and how we can leverage AI for good in various senses. So what other things to say right off? A little bit of nomenclature. For purposes of this talk, and this talk only, I'm probably going to use AI and ML interchangeably. I know those are not the same thing, and we can discuss the differences between those if you want to, but I'm just going to use them as synonyms for now. And I'm not talking right now about the singularity or strong AI or human level AI. I'm focusing more on the type of machine learning and intelligence that we have today and that we can build and that is changing our world right now. So bear with me. And I think I know we have a few people on the call here and others following along online. If there are questions about what I'm talking about in the moment, please someone tell me. I'm not looking at the chat. I'm not looking at anything else, but feel free to interrupt as we go. And we'll take little side roads as we get to them. So a quick introduction. I'm Jeremiah. I'm just a normal guy, I guess. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up there and then eventually studied mathematics. Mathematics brought me to the world of applied math and optimization. From there I discovered what data science was and machine learning, and that's where I work today at Sage AI Labs. So my background is in pure and applied mathematics, and I think this always sort of focuses the perspective that I bring to things, but it is not the only path towards doing this type of work. And I think it's a good path. It was very good for me. But one of the things that I love about this field is it's very interdisciplinary. I work with people from the humanities, from the sciences, from policy, from the security world, from classical software engineering, pure algorithms and distributed systems. And I think we have better conversations when everybody's voices are heard. So there's a few plugs for getting a hold of me if you'd like to. Feel free to reach out. Don't be a stranger. But I work at Sage AI Labs, and Elena said Sage is the second largest company in the UK. We have a global presence. I'm blessed to work with people from around the world, and the AI Labs is very much the same way. We have a fairly diverse set of people with fairly diverse backgrounds that are in Europe, in Australia, in the US. Not so much in Asia yet, but we'll get there. And I think that is our strength. You can see some of the people who founded the AI Labs back there were significantly bigger than then, but we're going strong, and we are machine learning practitioners. We are software engineers. We are people who build things, and that's something I hope that everybody here can latch onto a little bit. I think by participating in this hackathon, by exploring these ideas, you are becoming a builder. Maybe you are one already, and that's tremendously powerful. It's also tremendously fun. So I think keep that in mind as we go. I think you are joining or have joined a community of people like you around the world who are interested in these ideas and who are shaping the direction of this technology. Remember, machine learning systems are for humans and by humans, and you are those humans. I said I'd give a little bit of historical context. I stole this from the Harvard website, Science in the News, and it gives a timeline of the development of AI in the 20th century. And it has a lot of classical things on there. And I present this because without knowing where you come from and the history of your community, it's hard to know where you are and where you're going. So this is interesting for a few reasons. I mean, it has some of the things you'd expect. We have Alan Turing, we have Marvin Minsky, DARPA at MIT, Deep Blue beating Gary Kasparov. There's pure science in academia, there's science in society, and then there's science in games. Machine learning changing, our perception of what is possible out here. But not to be too mean to the folks who wrote this, but I think it's incomplete. In particular, it doesn't start until the 1940s here and doesn't really go past 2000, even though this article was written in 2017. And what I'd like to do next is to fill in some of the gaps that I see in this timeline, and tell you a bit more about my personal journey of getting familiar with this work and moving from mathematics to software to data science and machine learning to AI ethics and data privacy. So I think it all goes back, maybe you can trace it even further, but it all goes back to Bayes' theorem, Thomas Bayes, 1763. This is one of the first times we realized as a species that we can use mathematics to define learning and to update our perceptions of the world in as much as those are captured by probability. That's a major milestone. This slide is a bit busy, and so I will not, you can see it on GitHub later, but I couldn't walk away from this without saying a word about Ada Lovelace, the woman who inspired this day in this hackathon. I think she's an inspirational figure because she is one of the first people, maybe the first person to realize that what could be expressed mathematically could help us express more complicated and beautiful artistic human thought. The poetical sciences as an application of the analytical engine from her work with Charles Babbage. It's a huge intellectual leap and I think we owe her a great debt as a field. Skipping ahead a little bit, we can't have artificial intelligence without an artificial substrate for running that. And Grace Hopper is a wonderful woman to remember for her contributions in the fields of scientific computing and the development of some of the first compilers. A bit more on the practical side, things women I look to not every day, I guess, anymore, but who have really shaped the direction of my career are these last people. I think as we think about data privacy and the ethical applications of data and machine learning, we have to look to LaTanya Sweeney. She invented the concept of k-anonymity and really pushed this forward and made people realize that data is both a huge asset and a huge liability. It's very dangerous and can affect real people's lives. Her work was built upon by Cynthia Dwork at MSR and later Harvard. I think she's at Harvard now, with the concept of differential privacy, which goes beyond k-anonymity as a treatment for preserving some measure of privacy as we use data in the real world and as we use it in machine learning systems. There are differentially private implementations of machine learning algorithms thanks to her, and that the applications of those are yet to be fully explored, I can say. And finally, I think as we turn our heads towards ethical applications and also ethical development practices, I'd be remiss in not mentioning Timnit Gebru, whose work is pushing the edge of what we know about how to do this correctly. I highlighted one of her recent papers, but her work on model cards and things like that should not be overlooked. She is a real badass, and I'm glad that she's out there doing her thing. I'm going to shift gears now. Please interrupt me if you have questions. But AI is not a feature. I think probably a lot of people on this call know this, but it is materially different from traditional software development. And that's kind of illustrated in this diagram here. But because it is different, it means that we as practitioners need to reorient ourselves, especially if you come from a background of software engineering or computer science, around this new paradigm. What does that look like? I think, I'm not saying that AI replaces all software or software development practices, but I'm saying it augments them. AI is centered, the development of AI is centered around data, and that's illustrated here. I think in deterministic systems, you can write deterministic tests, and that's much harder in an AI world. Maybe user evaluation is often replaced by a very data-intensive or statistical analysis. The way we get these projects off the ground is also very different. I mean, we need to think about how we collect data and collect that in a good way, with user consent and in an ethical manner. And it's just not the same. It's a new skill set. And I'm so excited that people here have been able to learn that skill set from the beginning. I think a lot of us old folks had to kind of come from here and learn this. I certainly did a little bit, but you are not burdened by that. You get to learn the new thing from the beginning and orient yourselves towards these new types of applications. That said, everything is not easy. I think this work from Monica Ragati illustrates that in order to do AI, to do ML, to develop data-intensive algorithms, you have to get a lot of things right. And I present this as an offering for stages of thought that you can go through. Sometimes you can go through this progression very quickly, and that's extremely powerful. But as you're implementing your projects and your ideas, keep this in mind. Am I doing collection? Am I doing exploration? Am I ready to choose a model? And the more you can kind of delineate these in your mind and in your code, in your interfaces, the easier a time you'll have. I think you are standing on the shoulders of giants. I am not one of them. I am also standing there. But we have some best practices. We know what it takes to do this to some degree. Not that we have any idea what true intelligence is, but we've learned a thing or two in the last 20 years, maybe 50 years since Minsky. Finally, I think to extend that idea a little bit, you can collect all the data you want. You can walk up that data hierarchy of needs and not be a responsible ML practitioner. This talk is not only about how to do ML, but it is how to do good ML, how to do correct ML, how to involve users in the conversation that we're having about the things that we build and the uses of their data. And I think these are a few best practices and hazards along the road that you will see and that you should watch out for. I think, fortunately, the legal landscape is starting to catch up a little bit. I mentioned some relevant laws depending on your geography, but what is legal is not always ethical, and vice versa. And you need to keep this in mind. And I think hold yourselves and hold your community to a very high ethical standard. I could go over some examples of the abuse of AI and the introduction of algorithmic bias, or how algorithms can reflect the bias of the humans that generate the data that they run on. I think you've seen a lot of examples of that today. So maybe we'll touch on a few of those in the discussion. But you have to watch out for this. You have to account for this. Technology may or may not be inevitable, but the technology that you build is not inevitable. You get to shape that. And AI systems are for humans. You have to think of the humans that you're building this technology for, and what's going to be good for them, and help them decide whether or not to participate in these systems. So that is just about all the material that I have today. I'd like to remind you that ML systems are for humans and by humans, and you are those humans. And thank you for the time. What are your questions? What can we talk about further?
Wow, thank you so much, Jeremiah. This is really great. And thank you for bringing up Timnit Gebru as well. She's one of my favorites that I'm also following. And I really love the work that she's doing, and completely supportive of all the campaigns. And obviously being one of the founders of Black in AI, we always try to, bring our hackathons to the most diverse communities, whether in Africa or bringing more ethnic diversity into our hackathons as well. So Jeremiah, I wanted to ask you the first question. With all the ethical frameworks, of which there are so many.
Oh yes, we're barely scratching the surface of how to do this well, in my opinion. But please.
I know lots of frameworks are being developed. I don't know whether we're all sort of following those frameworks, or whether there is something standard that we can rely on. What would you recommend that young people look into when they design their products? Is there anything that is simple enough for a young person to look at and to say, okay, this is a checklist, I want to do X, Y, and Z. There is so much out there. Is there anything you have come across that you could recommend as a resource for young people to look at?
This is very hard. I think it is a complicated landscape, and I think first of all, the thing to realize is that that ethical AI does not come from a vacuum. I think the frameworks of data privacy and data protection that have been developed are a very useful starting point. They do not get us all the way there, but I think it's been a bit surprising to me how effective, say, GDPR is at getting people to ask good questions. Mm. The EU's general protection on data privacy is a really good place to start, because it tells us that we need to do things like get explicit user consent, and that consent needs to be informed. That we need to think of our applications a bit harder up front. And this is light years more evolved than the industry when I started in it, 12, 13 years ago now, where it was fairly common to say, well, just give us all the data, we'll figure it out. And I think that's very good, that we're coming in that direction. I think beyond that, we're still at the place where you need to be familiar with individual examples in the subfield of AI that you are working in. When it comes to image recognition, are you doing facial recognition? Do you support faces of all colors? Should you be doing facial recognition because your model may, if you succeed, your model may be abused by other third parties? These are all good questions to ask. If you're working in a field like mine, you know, in the accounting and kind of process automation space, the questions are much more around the cost of getting things wrong with AI. We do fraud detection, we do outlier detection in some of our products, and what is the cost of flagging something, a transaction, say, as fraudulent or as suspicious or things like that? You know, can we make that determination with sufficient confidence and sufficient lack of bias that it can be released in an ethical manner? These are questions we ask ourselves from the beginning, and that's the only other advice I would give, is think of these questions up front as much as you can, because once your model is in the wild, once your product is released, it can be very hard or impossible to bring back. There's a Pandora's box there.
Definitely. And I have a question here. At what stage of product development would you start thinking about ethics? Is it in the beginning, in the end, or is it something that iteratively you have to go back and check in again? How many times do, for instance, hackathons, you know, some of them lasted 2 days, others 1 week, you know, some a bit longer, some shorter. In that kind of scenario, when should young people look into all of these ethical questions? And then in real life, for you, for instance, when you're working on a project, at what stage do you say, there's a checklist somewhere, the ethical frameworks, you know, I need to look whether. So when would you normally do this?
I think the best time to learn it is as you learn the hard technical skills that you are developing, you know, in order to be able to collect that data, in order to be able to implement those systems. But then on a project basis, it should be layered in. Very similar to how maybe security, you know, is thought about. Like, you can't build a secure system by thinking of security at the end and layering it on. You need to think of that at the design phase. You need to think about it at the data exploration phase. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you've collected that data, you've already taken steps that will have ethical implications. And I think you should follow good ethical data collection practices. But often I think checking in at that EDA, exploratory data analysis phase of development, is extremely useful, because you'll see things that surprise you. Maybe we don't have data, you know, from a full distribution of the type of humans that we need to serve or need to serve well. You know, and I think just before release is another great time to check in. I mean, you'll have often put in a lot of work there, but until you see a prototype running, or maybe test it on a small sample, you don't quite, it might not hit home the consequences of that, or how that could be used or abused. So at least 3 check-in points, maybe more.
Yeah, no, that's really great. We always insist on all teenagers looking into ethical principles at the very design, at the very beginning of the idea and their project. So that's really great that you're insisting on the same. Another question I would like to ask is, a lot of the teenagers at the moment are based in some of the places where data is just not existent. So, for instance, there will be a team in Palestine or in Syria working on, I remember in one of the last hackathons, they were working on mental health data, or they were working on some other disability data, and there was just no way they could source that data locally.
Absolutely.
Where do you think it would be possible for a project like this, or in such circumstances, to find data that was ethically sourced and you know, compliant with all of the frameworks and principles, and they can use ethically? What would you suggest they do in this case?
It's a great question. I'm presented with this problem. I mean, it's often called the cold start problem, in model development. And I'm faced with this every day in a different way. I think there are a few ways around it. The first is just I'd like to maybe go back a couple slides because I think this sort of highlights it. The first is know when you have a problem. Don't try to start up here. You can't do deep learning.
I can't really see it. Can you share it again?
I'm so sorry. Let me do that. There we go. Yeah, I was saying you can't start at the top of this pyramid. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you can get there in an indirect way. In a healthcare application, to me, sounds like it might involve a lot of natural language processing. And an example of how you might bootstrap yourself into a situation there is to take advantage of language models that have been developed, not trained on healthcare specific data, but maybe you don't need that for your first round or to get a proof of concept going. You are part of a community that is investing a tremendous amount of resources in the development of such things, and you cannot just take it off the shelf and use it. The paper I highlighted by Timnit Gebru, is exactly about that, the dangers of using large language models. But you can get a lot of results in the form of pre-trained models that exist in the world. You're not building this in isolation. My other piece of general advice is to start small. You can build a very useful application that is a pure software application, and you can design good data collection systems from the beginning. What can you provide to your users? What problems can you solve without ML that would allow you to build towards that future? And finally, once you have a small amount of data, I'm a great proponent of the keep it simple, philosophy. Like, what can you do with a linear model? What can you do with a statistical analysis? What can you do with a rule-based system? Because often, like, by implementing these very simple things, you can get an idea of what's possible. You can add value immediately. You can build faster, and you can build towards something more sophisticated in the long run.
That's really, really great advice. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. And perhaps something a little bit more sort of general, as we have teenagers still busy. Some of them are in the final days. Many hackathons will be finishing on the 10th. So last final days, everyone is in a rush and stressed and whatnot. What advice would you give to those young people who are in the final stages of their product development? You probably have been in hackathons before yourself as a participant, and you've hacked many times. So what would be your three top pieces of advice to our young hackers, particularly the ones who've been, perhaps it's their first journey, first steps?
Oh, absolutely. I think Rome was not built in a day. That's maybe the first one. I think some people doing their very first contributions here are stepping into a bigger world, and I'm just tremendously envious because there's nothing better than being bad at something and seeing a wider world that you are just stepping into. That is when you do the most learning. In deep learning, we have this ADA parameter, the learning rate. That's when the learning rate is highest, and that's great. So there are, maybe my second piece of advice is to remember that as long as you are learning, you are succeeding here. And the third piece of advice, I wish someone had told me this more, back in university or something. Get some sleep. Don't push yourselves too hard. I think hackathons are wonderful chances to get a really intense experience, but take care of yourselves. I've learned personally, that I do my best work with a little bit more sleep, and there are diminishing returns to really pushing too hard. So do what you can, find ways to recognize the successes that you have gained, and have fun with it.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah, and thank you for waking up so early for us as well. I know you're engaged probably in Kazakhstan or somewhere right now. How is it going? How is that hackathon going?
Still getting off the ground. I think I'm seeing a lot of exciting ideas around how to use AI to tackle big problems for the world, and that's fantastic. I think that's what gets me up early in the morning or has me on Discord late at night, because it really is inspirational. I think it's amazing to see how further along, that's how you say that, young people are today than when I was a teenager. It's great.
Fantastic. No, that's amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing all of the amazing ideas in Kazakhstan and other places, of course. And Jeremiah, if you are going to be in Vegas in November, I might be seeing you there in person. I'm so looking forward to reconnecting with people in person. Let's just see what happens with all the laws and latest regulations with travel. But I think it's time to get back to normality and meet people in person. So looking forward to that. So thank you so much for joining us once again. So everyone,
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Everyone will be tuning back in tomorrow. So to listen to two more incredible speakers again. So come back onto our YouTube channel. And I know many of you will be listening to this afterwards, those of you who are already asleep, perhaps. But we're really looking forward to inspiring you more tomorrow. And of course, there will be our Ada Lovelace panel next week. And we can't wait to have somebody from Sage and JSK and NVIDIA to inspire you with their thoughts on climate and positive activism and how we can inspire and empower everyone in times like now. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will be seeing you again tomorrow.